Today's guest is a strategic ESG advisor at EQOLOGIC, a part of EQUAGE Group, Liselore Kolff. Hello, Liz. Can you please introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us what is your company doing?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me here today. So I work for EQOLOGIC, as you mentioned at the start, and what we do is we are a management advisory team, and we apply systems thinking to help companies with issues around their supply chain, focused in the sustainability area, and as well a key point that we focus on is regulations. Of course, it's a complex regulation area, so we focus on helping companies on that element, and as well we provide training, which can be internally or externally, depending on the request of the client, of course.
In simple words, what is ESG and why actually companies should care about it?
Yeah, so ESG, it stands for environmental, social and governance, and it's basically a framework. So a lot of companies, of course, focus on their profit, but this helps to focus on your actions as a company. What does it do on the people, the planet, those type of elements, and as well the governance aspect of it. So if you think environment is the one you hear the most about, with climate change, etc. But it's more than that. So if you think about social, you think about your human rights. Are you actually doing that as a company? How do you treat your employees? But as well, what's your impact on a community, for example? And from a governance side of point, it's the leadership. Is it done ethically? How is it? What's the accountability of the top? So that's in short what ESG is. I think the second part of your question was like, why is it?
Should care now.
So today we see it's a demand actually from investors and customers. It's people are much more interested to see what is like purpose-driven companies. What are they actually doing? What's their impact on the climate, for example? So it's a way to attract talent, as people are more focused on it. But also if you think about banks or investors, it's for them a critical element to say if they're going to provide a loan to you. So it's not a nice to have at the moment, but really a critical part of doing business.
I think it's a very interesting element to follow the concept, just because before it was just the CSR, right? The corporate social responsibility, but it was mainly philanthropic events, right? Like charitable activities. And through years, it has been evolved and broadened into more deep rules and compliance services that we now see.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. I think what we see now, there's much more regulation around it, and that's why ESG is now more a well-known a buzzword a little bit, but it's been around for years, to be fair. It's just that I think over the recent years it's becoming more topic because we see actually impact on our planet from a climate point of view. But the governments are now much more focused on it, so companies need to comply and make sure that they actually follow the rules.
Am I correct that the recent boom has started from 2021 with BlackRock and Larry Fink sending letter to CEOs that now ESG should be a must in companies?
It's I would say it's longer. It's maybe can be for some people it's maybe a tipping point, but if I don't know the exact numbers, but it's been around for years because we have been manufacturing for years, right? It's just that recently we have been starting developing technology, or recently, the past 100 years probably, to actually track what is our impact and how do we treat our people. And that's based on that slowly new regulations have been put in place to make sure that people are treated in a right way, leadership is done, there are not a lot of bribes. And that is has been a process, and with a few tipping points, it's been more in the public eye.
So speaking about environmental, what are the major risks and how can companies mitigate them?
So the key one is carbon emissions, so your greenhouse gases, which especially if you think about manufacturing or transportation is one of the key polluters. But pollution in general, so you can think about companies that dump their wastewater in the sea or those type of elements. So it's more than only the carbon emissions. So how do you mitigate the risks? So a key is to map your supply chain to understand what are you influenced directly or indirectly. So at EQOLOGIC, for example, we make together with the client a checklist to go through. And based on that, we apply like weighted averages to make sure that it's visible what is your critical elements you need to focus on and what's something that can maybe be done in a few months' time. So based on that, we will then roll out a strategic plan to make sure that the critical elements are dealt with on a quick basis, so to say. And then, of course, a continuous improvement to make sure the elements will be dealt with over time.
So the roadmap is really very important. From A to Z, you need to know how it works and what are the processes actually involved, right? If you go like deep down.
Yeah, and as well to understand kind of some processes you can influence directly. Exactly. So maybe that's something that you can do on a quicker, and others are maybe indirect and it takes more time to actually make the changes. So then that's something that can be done if it's not critical what the issue is, can be done at a later stage in the process.
How can suppliers from Asian countries adapt to strict requirements from Western buyers?
What can be done, the key is transparency, be transparent as possible, so implement transparency kind of systems along your supply chain, and that will help to make people accountable, because that's of course the key element, that people need to be accountable for the actions that they're doing.
And how can companies reduce their carbon footprint that you mentioned earlier through maybe smarter logistics sources or other strategies?
If you look from a sourcing point of view, what can you do local or more regional instead of the tricky thing with supply chain? It's of course often a global complex supply chain. So maybe you design a product in one country, it gets manufactured in another country, and then it gets shipped to several countries along the way. So that will be a thing to have a look at. What can you do more local? And as well, what materials are you actually using? Are there options to maybe use recycle type of products to make it more sustainable? From a logistic point of view, a lot is done by air, but maybe can you do it by sea or over land, which makes a huge impact on your emissions, even if it takes a bit longer. The other thing is to think about like consolidating shipments. Can you make it more efficient? So yes, it can be less shipments, change to electrical power sources, renewable energy. If you think about Unilever, they redesigned their products, so it was lighter and compacter. And based on that, they were able to reduce the trucks, which makes, of course, a big impact on your overall supply chain. So sometimes it's thinking about the box, sometimes it actually can be just a simple solution and you already make a big impact.
So we're trying to make it more efficient for ourselves, and we're also trying to make it more efficient for our future businesses' life.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes people get a bit overwhelmed by when they think about ESG. There's so much to do, there's so many elements. But like you said, it's sometimes starting with just a simple element to change it and to make it already more efficient. You actually can, not always, but it can lead to cost savings, and that's of course then beneficial on the long run.
It was actually my next question. How can cost-sensitive companies control these ESG implementations? Because I see it like there are many changes that have to be done, and sometimes they require time, they require other resources and skills, and even the whole roadmaps. Sometimes it's costly, right?
Yeah, so indeed that can be a worry. I think it's just taking it like step by step. So start with just mapping out your supply chain and think beyond your tier 1 suppliers, but who are actually your other suppliers as well down the road. And then just do a quick check. What are your risks? Do you have? Where are your risks? What can you see? And based on that, you can already probably see some low-hanging fruit that you can start with trying to improve. And then it not always needs to be like you need to install this huge technology or something that can be very costly.
Yes.
So it's looking at where are your risks, and then of course think about the long term. Sometimes you do need to invest,
Exactly.
but then on the long run you get more benefit out of it.
So long-term vision is actually a key to ESG strategies and implementations.
Yes, and that can also make it a challenge, because if you look at boards from a company or in general, it's a short period that they are in a company, right? But the long term is the vision we all should think about, also for your own future or the future from your kids, right? So it's key to always keep that long term in mind when making decisions.
Thank you. Let's speak about social aspect. So what are the KPIs that companies should track in order to ensure ethical labor strategies?
So if you think about KPIs from a social point of view, they're definitely key and critical, right? Because without measuring, you can't see how you're doing. I think one thing to note before I name a few is the execution is crucial as well.
Yes.
But to think about KPIs, it's about, for example, the wages. Are people getting the minimum wage as well? What's the turnover rate? Can be if a company has a high turnover, it could indicate that there's maybe bad management going on. Can people make complaints about what's happening in the company, and how quickly is a resolution come forward to it? That are some of the KPIs. From a health and safety point of view, are there many incidents, and how quickly or are they dealt with? If you have a factory with a lot of incidents, then something must be going wrong, right? So that are a few key KPIs. If you think about the execution itself, it's of course can be quite tricky. If you think about you're working in a shipyard, and you need to deliver your shipment right on time, but actually there's an issue, but someone pays you a red envelope, for example, as we have it here in China, and it's double your salary. What do? Do you take that shipment, or do you follow the rules? Or take the envelope, sorry, I have to say. And that takes time to change that type of behavior. And with that, it's key to be on the ground and see what's actually happening to slowly make those type of changes over time. So KPIs are good, but definitely need to be also looked on the ground how they are actually executed.
And speaking about execution and measurement, do cultural difference affect the social compliance, and how does it work in different countries?
No, absolutely. Every culture is very different. If you think about like a Western culture, it's often, well, depending where, but I'm Dutch, so in the Netherlands, for example, often it's an open floor office. You can go to your manager if you have a problem, you have a chat about it, and then hopefully it gets resolved. So if you think about here in China, it's a very, there's a hierarchy, right? So the boss decides what's actually happening. Not everywhere, but in general, that's the common way of doing business. Yes. And that could mean that workers or employees don't tell them if there's a problem. Or you have, for example, a family-run business, and one of the cousins who's actually underage wants to start working, and they let it happen. So it's different way of workings, and of course in some cultures it can be fine that it's done that way, but in other cultures it's seen as a violation. Yes. So therefore there's definitely no one size fits all, and as a global company you need to look at the local culture you're working in and what can be done, but of course stick with your own rules as well, that if you think it's crossing a line from a human right point of view, then that's something that has to change.
Is it measured differently, let's say, in Asian country or in European country or in the US?
So measured people will use the same KPIs, but the execution can be done differently. So there could be a bookkeeping done that it says everything is fine, but actually on the floor it's not the case. So that was kind of what I was saying earlier. It's key to actually see what's happening, visit the factories, what is happening there. Because like the textile industry, there's a lot of labor goes into it, and they maybe say everything is fine. So the measurements, the KPIs will be the same, but the execution can be very different. And that's why it's key to go there to see what's actually happening.
For the next question, I know the answer, but I would love to listen to an expert as yourself, as a third party. How can audits and inspections play a role and improve social responsibilities of the suppliers?
Yeah, it's key because what the benefit is of a third party like yourself is that they are independent, right? So if, for example, as the local management missed, not always intentional, but they maybe missed that bookkeeping is done in the wrong way, or there is actually children working in the factory, and then an auditor comes in and sees what's actually happening, and they make a proper report, and that shows them where actually the issues are.
Yes.
And of course the next step is then not only pointing out the issues, but then as well helping on to see what can we actually do to resolve the issues, and how to improve it. So it's creates accountability, and if a company rejects an audit, you know that there's probably something that's not going well. So it's definitely key to make sure that people are following the rules as they're set.
Yeah. It's actually getting more and more popular, like audits, supplier audits, factory audits, not in all the regions, because we have clients from all over the world. Not all countries are very much tracking this, but I can see that it's increasing the demand for the audits, because companies, brands, they really want to be more aware of every supplying chain step, how it is executed, how it looks, who are the people behind, what are the processes behind every production, how does it go, what are the hidden things. But they're not only looking, as you said, just like to show them, right, to actually like learn. They're also looking for the ways how we can improve this.
No, and that's of course the key eventually on how to make sure that it's not seen the next time. Interesting to know that some countries are tracking it less. I won't go into details there.
And speaking about governance, what does the good governance look like in supplier relations, and how it can be measured?
So good governance starts with having good oversight, making sure you build trust that it's done in the right way, because if it's only the big boss telling what to do, that sometimes can cause friction. So a formal code of conduct is essential, as well looking at from a risk management point of view. This is something we do as EQOLOGIC as well, to see is the compliance actually followed through, how can we help if there are issues, to make sure that the governance is met, that is set from a governance but also from an internal business point of view, for example.
How today companies can track ESG performance in real time?
So it starts with actually having the right tools, technology and data as the three type of elements. And data is sometimes can be challenging, but if you have the right people on board, the right technology, you can gather the data in a right way. If you think about like the inspection companies, everyone is now on board with an ESG SaaS technology, like an SAP. So how can companies do this? Is to use digital platforms, for example, as well in your supply chain itself, track on like the machines, how it's actually doing. And what the advantage is if you have it set up as a real time, is that you can take action, right? Instead of that you wait for your monthly or yearly report. So nowadays we see that technology is key to make sure you have the ability to report on your ESG. For example, ourselves as EQOLOGIC, we have now partnership as well with EQONOS that can help from a digital point of view to provide that solutions to our clients. As it's, you can't live without now, I would say.
Wow, so is it like an app that through what you can like track, or how actually it works? Is it that the special like QR code on the product which contains the information from the previous processes? Could you please explain a little bit how exactly it works?
So the QR code definitely is a concept that's used. So for example, if you think about sun care, for example, you use batch numbers. So it's like a production is in a certain batch. So if you get a complaint or something goes wrong with something, then you know that whole batch you need to take out of the market, for example.
Yes.
And based on that you can track, because if you don't track it all the way down, then how can you then indicate where something went wrong along the way? So that's more into detail in terms of what you were asking about, like apps. It depends what type of software you use. Nowadays, I think if it's online, you will have it on your phone in an app, or you can just enter it from your tablet or your laptop. Or it's like a build-in of an existing technology that you can only use probably from your work laptop from that perspective. But in general, you should be able to get it online, depending what provider you work with.
And I was also thinking, what about all the suppliers that been involved in the production of this particular like product? Can we also track them in this QR code, or are there any maybe other like deeper ways to track it?
So it's not always a QR code, but it can be just a code. It can be some letters, numbers, or whatever, and based on that you can track it down, or you should be able to track it down, especially with blockchain, for example, that gives the transparency really from A to B, where was the product at what time, so you know if something went wrong. It doesn't always have to be at the end of the production. It can be that maybe actually something happened at the start. So based on codes that will be used, you should be able to track it down all the way to where it started.
It's interesting how more and more transparent everything becomes, right? And with this opportunity to like track in real time all the processes.
It's fascinating. I think, like you said, nowadays almost everything is traceable. Which can be scary, but it can also be a good thing, that you know at least if something went wrong, where it happened.
And in the long run, it actually ensures the quality, right? Because if everything can be seen and visible and tracked, then there is no ways to hide some unqualified processes.
Exactly, so from a quality point of view, if it's done correctly, because something sometimes has to go wrong to see if your processes are actually working, it should give you a better way of managing your quality, for sure. That's a nice question. So if you think about what can be done as mistakes, it can be that it's just seen as a marketing, as a buzzword, we have to do this, and it's not followed through in the company itself. Or people set unrealistic goals. So they say, okay, by 2030 we will be net zero.
I heard a lot of this.
And then you get into a dangerous zone that you're actually greenwashing. So those things are definitely something you need to avoid. Also, a lot of people focus on the E instead of also the S and the G. And as well, you need to look at your whole supply chain. So it's not only you, what are actually the suppliers of your suppliers doing, to make sure you have the full spectrum of, so you are aware what's impacting. And audits. If you're not auditing what you're doing, how do you know it's done correctly, right? So from that perspective, that are a few key mistakes that we see that sometimes is lacking by companies.
I heard a lot about ESG, just a marketing strategy to kind of show everybody that we are on time with the technologies, with the demand, and yes, that it can be also focused more on environmental and completely ignoring the other two letters. Then it's also
I would say ESG is just a word, right? Some people even don't know what it means, but it's just the sustainability in general that makes it key that companies look at. And maybe people see it as a buzzword, but it is essential that it gets followed through to make sure, especially from a risk point of view, for example. If your factory is in a flooding area and you don't do anything about it, yeah, you get in trouble maybe down the line. So it's crucial to think about it, what you can do to mitigate risks, for example.
In your opinion, where ESG compliance heading in the next 3-5 years?
So in the next 3 to 5 years, I think we will see a shift from a nice to have to a must have. If you think about the regulations that are out there at the moment, so the CSDDD, for example, in Europe, there are more and more coming. Not to make it complex, they're now also making it more simple. So regulations, be compliant is one of the key. And as well, mandatory ESG disclosures. So it's all about being compliant, making sure you have the right processes in place. But besides that, we also see a rising demand of investors and customers.
Yes.
They want to make sure the people they're working with are actually focusing on sustainability. Are they actually following the human rights set of rules, right? So it's definitely a shift from that perspective that ESG will be a must instead of a nice to have.
So in your home country, how popular ESG is in Netherlands?
So ESG, I think in the West, if I'm honest, it's quite popular. But popular is not the right word, but you hear a lot about it, say it that way. So younger people are more interested in it, they more care about it, they want to work in the field. So there's definitely a shift that you see that people are more interested in the topic. And a lot has been done as well. And in Asia it's similar, but a slightly different approach as well, because the manufacturing is done differently, but a lot of the manufacturing also moved, for example, to Asia. So it depends a bit. Everyone tries to do their best. That's definitely what we can see. And there's a rise for people to be part of the journey.
To be aware and to also see the opportunities and see the actual need of it.
Yeah, so there's definitely a greater awareness. Still, I'm sometimes shocked if people have no clue about what it is or what they can do. Like I once set up like eat no meat for a month or a week, and then people were like, oh, I can't do that. And I'm like, wow, okay, it's not, for me it didn't feel like such a big task, but for some people that is already such an impact to say, okay, I'm not eating meat for a day in the week. Living in China, it's a very different approach, for example, on that element. But that's the awareness. The actual implementation is something that's more done by the boards, or should be executed by the boards themselves. And there's definitely a shift that you see that they are creating new roles or embedding it in the organization to make that shift that is needed.
And what advice would you give to companies that just starting implementation of the ESG?
Yeah, so for companies who are just starting, I would say it's not a tick box exercise. It's something to look around as a strategy for your company. And starting with a supply chain, map it out, see where do you have risk along the way. What is your low-hanging fruit? Where can you actually make a change already from a quick win point of view, for example? And it always doesn't need to be that it costs you a lot of money, but it's being aware of actually what's happening and then making the changes there.
What if our listeners want to take one practical step after this episode? What would it be?
Well, it starts with your supply chain, as we talked a lot about. Just to see who are your tier 1 suppliers to start with. But as well, what data is actually missing? Do we need to make some changes in the reporting? And it's stuff you can do on your own. But of course, it can feel overwhelming. And you can ask for help, like at EQOLOGIC, that sometimes we come in and help clients to set that first step, to help them in the first direction. We can do a quick health check to see how is it all set up, and then based on that you do a deep dive, for example. by all thinking about the whole system on its own, to make sure that you make the steps in the right direction.
Yeah, because it might seem a little bit overwhelming because so many aspects that have to be followed, and also a lot of details that one just might not be aware of.
No, for sure, and that's something that you see, but it could be that maybe you are great in your E and your S, but there's something lacking in the G, and then it's actually not such a big task that you have to do. Or it's the E side. It doesn't have to be your there are critical elements in everything, right? So it depends as well, of course, what the focus is as your company. And a starting point can say, okay, we start first with the E or the S and the G. Of course, it doesn't mean that one is more important than the other, but that can make it as a starting point, can make that sometimes easier.
It's a little bit tricky because there are not so many regulations about ESG. Am I right? Or I've been reading a lot and watching a lot of also like videos and reading articles that it is very popular, but sometimes it is seen just as a marketing campaign.
There are regulations and there are more coming. I think currently some are more maybe, how do you say it, not mandatory, but there's a shift that is coming that it will get mandatory. And currently I think most regulations are focused on the bigger companies, but that will roll down because if you think about the supply chain, that will also bend down all the way down. So that's the shift if we talk about the future that will come, that it will get mandatory all the way down to every company.
Well, I'm very excited to see how it all will look like in 3, 5, and 10 years, and what kind of quality of the products or services that we get, how it will evolve. All the tools like AI, how it can be also implemented and right.
No, it's amazing to see what technology is doing at the moment, and that will definitely have also an impact from a sustainability point of view. So I'm also very interested to see how it all develops, and of course we hope that it all develops in the right way.
Thank you very much, Liz, for
so much for
being
having me
here, and I hope we will meet in the near future, let's say a few years. Maybe there will be something new that we can discuss. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.